Hello, all you freedom-loving people. The results in Wisconsin and Florida are split, and so is the opinion on whether the federal district judges have overstepped their authority in their attempts to block President Trump's executive orders. Okay, let's get into it. On Monday, U.S. District Judge Catherine Polk-Failla dismissed a proposed class action lawsuit against former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo that blamed his administration for COVID-19 deaths in nursing homes across the state. The plaintiffs argued that their family members had contracted COVID-19 in New York State nursing homes due to a March 2020 order that was issued by Cuomo that prohibited nursing homes from denying the admission of people into their facilities solely based on a confirmed or suspected diagnosis of COVID-19. The reason Failla dismissed the case is that the plaintiffs in the case did not have the federal right to file a lawsuit against the former governor. The judge wrote, "As explained herein, and despite the court's deepest sympathy for plaintiffs and their families, the fact remains that their preferred claims are not legally viable." In a statement posted on X on March 31st, Cuomo's spokesperson hailed the judge's decision and said that anytime the issue gets taken out of the press or the political arena and into the courts, the truth wins. Cuomo has faced a significant political backlash from both Republicans and far-left Democrats over the nursing home directive. New York State Attorney General Letitia James even reported in early 2021 that more people died from the virus in nursing homes than the New York State Department of Health announced at the time, perhaps as many as 50% of the deaths. But Cuomo denied that his administration underreported COVID-19 deaths. Cuomo said at the time, "We said these are the deaths without the out-of-facility death numbers, which we will add when they're accurate, which will reduce the hospital death number. But the total number of deaths stays the same. It was an allocation question." And in another case in New York today, a federal judge dismissed the criminal corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. The U.S. District Court Judge Dale Ho in Manhattan dismissed the case with prejudice. This means that charges cannot be brought again. In fact, the DOJ originally asked Judge Ho to toss the case without prejudice. This was because it would allow the prosecutors to refile charges against the Democrat in the future if the department chose to do so. However, Judge Ho denied the DOJ's request for dismissal without prejudice. He said that doing so would create the unavoidable perception that the mayor's freedom depends on his ability to carry out the immigration enforcement priorities of the administration, and that he might be more beholden to the demands of the federal government than to the wishes of his own constituents. That appearance is inevitable, and it counsels in favor of dismissal with prejudice. The ruling now frees Mayor Adams to concentrate on the upcoming Democratic primary for mayorship in June. Tuesday's Supreme Court race in Wisconsin could have a major national impact. The race was between conservative Brad Schimmel and liberal Susan Crawford. The results will not only affect important issues like transgenderism, immigration, and election integrity, but it could also affect the balance of power in the U.S. Congress. That's because Crawford has promised to rewrite Wisconsin's U.S. congressional districts to help Democrats win otherwise unwinnable elections by screening. And since the outcome of this election was so consequential, both candidates received contributions from tens of thousands of donors across all 50 states. Musk contributed $3 million to the state's Republican Party. Billionaires George Soros and J.B. Pritzker contributed $2 million and $1.5 million, respectively, to the state Democratic Party. So it's fair to say that this was the most expensive state Supreme Court race in history. Crawford's campaign spent $21 million and Schimmel's campaign spent about $10 million. Other groups spent more than $81 million in support of the two candidates. President Trump endorsed Schimmel in Wisconsin, and America PAC, which is associated with Elon Musk, also heavily supported Schimmel. Conservatives viewed the race as a battle for the future of the state and the country, but Crawford's allies cast the race as a referendum on Musk. Some people see Elon Musk as trying to buy Wisconsin, and they wanted to show him that they are not for sale. And even though President Trump won Wisconsin by 1.7 million votes in the 2024 election, his support did not translate into momentum for Schimmel. At 10 p.m. last night, the Associated Press had called the Wisconsin race for Crawford. At that time, Crawford won with 55% of the vote to Schimmel's 44% when 70% had reported. And also on the ballot in Wisconsin yesterday, Wisconsin voters approved a ballot measure that enshrines in the state constitution the requirement for photo identification in order to cast a ballot. Approximately 63% of voters supported the ballot measure, while about 37% voted against it. State Senator Vanguard, who co-authored the amendment, celebrated the vote. Vanguard said that the voter photo ID requirement will now become the law of the land no matter the political whims of the Supreme Court or legislature. As of April 2024, 21 states now require photo identification to vote, while 15 states accept other kinds of identification. And in two special elections in Florida, Republicans did well. Republican State Senator Randy Fine defeated Democrat Josh Weil in the special election for Florida's 6th congressional district. He will take over former Congressman Mike Waltz's seat. Waltz is currently the White House National Security Advisor. Florida Treasurer Jimmy Patronis also defeated Democrat Gay Valamont to win the special election for Florida's 1st congressional district, replacing former Representative Matt Gaetz's House seat. Democratic U.S. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey set a record on Tuesday. He broke the record for the longest speech in history of the U.S. Senate. He spoke on the Senate floor for 25 hours and 5 minutes. His lengthy speech began at 7 p.m. Monday and ended at 8:05 p.m. on Tuesday. The previous record was a 24-hour, 18-minute speech set by the late Senator Strom Thurmond in 1957. As a rule, speakers are not allowed to leave the venue to go to the restroom during a speech and are required to remain in a standing position. So this is a challenge for the speaker. He probably owes his good health to the fact that he is a former football tight end. In fact, Booker could have given a longer speech. Before the end of his speech, he finally said he would continue for a while and then go and deal with some physical emergencies. Booker was helped by many of his Democratic colleagues. These legislators asked him questions on the floor, and some spoke alone for minutes on end to temporarily lighten Booker's load. Otherwise, the only time he didn't speak was during a brief pause in the Senate's noon prayer on Tuesday. This marathon speech was not a filibuster against any specific piece of legislation. It was a symbolic action. It was one of the actions that Democrats are taking to counter the Republican and Trump agenda. Booker's speech was designed to highlight what Democrats see as dangerous actions taken by Republicans, including a tax bill that could cut trillions of dollars in spending and DOJ's ongoing efforts to lay off federal workers. Still, Booker centered his speech on a call for his party to find its resolve. He said, "We all must look in the mirror and say we will do better." His speech was one of the most dramatic forms of protest by Democratic lawmakers since President Trump took office on January 20th. In his speech, he also mentioned that many people believe that the United States is now facing a constitutional crisis. Many of President Trump's presidential executive orders have been challenged by temporary injunctions by district judges. These cases include many of the initiatives the Trump administration has taken, including ending birthright citizenship, firing federal employees, forming DOJ, ending the government's DEI program, ending federal support for gender-affirming care, banning transgender people from joining the military, shelving asylum applications, overturning the ban on offshore drilling, freezing foreign aid, shelving the refugee program, eliminating the Department of Education, and shutting down the Voice of America, to name a few. During the 4 years of President Trump's first presidency, a total of about 60 executive orders were blocked by district judges. But during Biden's presidency, only a total of 14 executive orders were blocked, and most of those occurred in Texas. The Trump administration has largely complied with the ban in all of these cases. However, in the case of the deportation of gang members a few weeks ago, the government continued to deport the illegal immigrants who were gang members. On Saturday, March 15th, shortly after 5 p.m., 2 planes departed the United States from Texas, and they flew to El Salvador via Honduras. The 2 planes carried 261 passengers. They were illegal immigrants who were members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua and the Salvadoran gang MS-13. An emergency hearing on application for judicial intervention was in progress at the time of takeoff. At 6:45 p.m., Judge Boasberg of the Federal District of D.C., at a hearing, verbally ordered the government to comply immediately with the halt of the deportations. He demanded that any aircraft carrying immigrants, whether about to take off or already in the air, return to the United States. By this time, however, both aircraft had already flown over the Yucatan Peninsula, which is far from the U.S. jurisdiction. Then, at 7:26, the judge's written injunction was issued. 10 minutes later, the first plane landed in Honduras. The incident brings to a peak the judicial standoff with the district judge since President Trump took office. In this emergency deportation, the Trump administration got all the deportation preparations in place before announcing the activation of the Enemy Alien Act. The federal district court held an emergency hearing, but the district court ultimately failed to stop the planes that were deporting illegal immigrants before they left U.S. airspace. The incident has not yet come to an end, though. Legal discussions on this case have been ongoing. It involves a major question about the basic political system of the United States. That is, how to determine the boundaries of the 3 branches of government in the United States. President Trump's staffers have explained that the Constitution gives the president broad authority to manage the nation's borders. But more than 14 judges and courts have tried to block President Trump's deportation programs. For example, a judge ruled last week that migrants must be allowed to appeal their deportations to countries other than their home country. This legal claim, if approved, would make it difficult for the president to deport economic or criminal migrants when the home country government does not want them back. So what is the public's opinion on the judge's opinion? A Rasmussen poll asked the question. Several federal district court judges have issued injunctions to block President Donald Trump's policies. Which is closer to your opinion? According to the poll, 49% said President Trump's policies violate the Constitution, but 45% said district court judges are wrongfully interfering with the president's exercise of his constitutional powers. Self-described moderates split 56% to 34%. They also asked, should President Trump just ignore federal court injunctions he believes are unconstitutional? And 27% of the people did say yes, including 41% of Republicans, while 60% said no, including 67% of centrists. So in this poll, 57% of likely voters said that the current conflict between President Trump and federal judges is a constitutional crisis. So what do the professionals think about the direct interference of presidential executive orders by the district court judges? The first controversy is the relationship between the executive branch and the judiciary. Judicial oversight of the executive branch is derived from the principle of separation of powers in the United States Constitution. Specifically, the principle of judicial review was established in the case of Madbury versus Madison in 1803. The federal courts have the power to review the constitutionality of executive actions. District judges, as a part of the federal judicial system, can determine whether an executive order is ultra vires. In addition, the Administrative Procedures Act allows courts to review administrative action and to set it aside or block it if it is found to be arbitrary, capricious, an abuse of power, or contrary to law. On the issue of deporting illegal gang members, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that judges do not have the authority to interfere with the president's foreign affairs and national security powers. Those who question the abuse of power by judges argued that the president was the supreme head of the federal government. The executive order he signs applies to the whole country. It is not fair that a district judge, who is a regional judge, should be able to issue an injunction that covers the entire U.S. Secondly, there is only one president of the United States, and there are 600 U.S. federal district judges throughout the United States. Each of them has the power to temporarily block presidential orders. Therefore, in extreme cases, the judicial system could completely paralyze the power of the president. Some politicians and legal scholars have proposed limiting the power of district courts through legislation or judicial rules, including limiting injunctions to the judge's judicial district rather than applying nationwide. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas criticized the nationwide ban in 2018, saying it lacks historical basis and undermines the judicial structure. In addition, the President of the United States is elected by the voters, and his power comes from the mandate of the voters. But 600 unelected judges can easily prevent the president from exercising his power. So who is leading the domestic and foreign policy of the United States? Some liberals, however, have argued that national injunctions are a necessary tool for protecting constitutional rights and the consistency of the law, and that the function of the judicial review is particularly important, especially when an executive order is likely to cause widespread and irreversible harm. The constraints imposed by U.S. federal district judges on presidential executive orders have existed throughout U.S. history, but they have not led to serious crises. This time, however, the situation is different. The executive orders issued by President Trump in his second term and the frequent injunctions issued by district court judges often involve fundamental changes in the executive power and behavior of the president, thus sharpening the tension between judicial oversight of the executive power. While this may not amount to a constitutional crisis, it does lead to a challenge to the principles of separation of power in the United States. On the bright side, this challenge may also be an opportunity for the United States to further define the boundaries between judicial and executive power. The separation of powers is the core of modern democracy. However, the key to the operation of such a system is the cooperation and compromise among various social strata and different ideologies. If it evolves into an unscrupulous struggle for power with everything turning into a fight to the death, the institutional foundation of modern Western civilization may no longer exist. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember that every like, comment, and share helps more people to see the truth. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have already subscribed, we thank you, but please double check to make sure that you're still subscribed, because some of our audience have reported that they're somehow unsubscribed without their knowledge. We've also heard that some of you don't get notifications of our videos anymore, so when you do subscribe on YouTube, please make sure to tap the notification bell as well. Okay, this is our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth.